This video is going to talk about adding integers. Now, recall that the integers are the whole numbers with the negatives. So it's -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on in both directions. Now, we're basically going to follow just two rules when adding integers. Either the two add-ins have the same sign, or the two add-ins have opposite signs. They could both be negative or both be positive. That would fall under the left side with the same sign. Or one could be positive and one could be negative. That would fall under the right side. They have opposite signs. So if you can follow one simple rule, you will never have problems doing this kind of problem. So on the left side, if they have the same sign, if you're adding numbers that are both positive or both negative, then we're going to add the absolute values of the numbers and keep the sign of the larger. However, if you're adding them and they have opposite signs, one of each, it doesn't matter if the negative comes first or second and the positive comes first or second. But if they're opposite signs, you're going to subtract their absolute values and keep the sign of the larger. So if you remember this one rule, you'll never have any problems. Now let's take a moment and look at some examples of adding integers. In both of these examples, you'll notice that the add-ins have the same signs. The first example, both of them are positive, a positive 7 being added to a positive 4. So what did we say the rule was? If you're adding numbers with the same signs, add their absolute values and keep the sign of the larger. Well, what's the absolute value of 7? Is 7. And the absolute value of 4 is 4. We're going to add them and we get 11. And we're going to keep the sign of the larger. Well, 7 is larger than 4 and its original sign was positive. So the answer will be a positive 11. Now that was a fairly simple example to take a look at, and we really didn't have to go through all this work because we know that 7 plus 4 is 11. But I wanted you to see that the rule works out even for the most basic problems. Now let's take a look at the second example. Both of these numbers that we're adding are negative. We have a -3 and we're adding a -6. So what does the rule say? They have the same sign, so we're going to take their absolute values and add them. The absolute value of -3 is 3, and the absolute value of -6 is 6. We're going to add them and get 9, and then we're going to keep the sign of the larger one. Well, 6 was the larger one, and its original sign was negative, so the answer is going to be negative. -9. So -3 plus a -6 is a -9. In the next two examples, you'll notice that the add-ins have different signs. In this case, the 3 is negative and the 7 is positive. So what was the rule? Well, we're going to take the absolute values and then subtract them this time and keep the sign of the larger. The absolute value of -3 is 3. And the absolute value of 7 is 7. So now we're going to subtract them. So 7 minus 3 equals 4. And notice that I switched the order that they were in. The 3 came first and then the 7. But down here I put the 7 first and then the 3. I did that because the 7 is larger, and when we subtract we always want to start with the larger number. So our answer was 4. And that means we're going to keep the sign of the larger. Well, 7 is larger than 3, and its original sign was positive. So our final answer will be positive. Positive 4. In the second example, again you'll see that we have opposite signs. The 9 is positive, and the 4 is negative. So that means we're going to take their absolute values and subtract, and keep the sign of the larger. So the absolute value of 9 is 9, and the absolute value of -4 is 4. So when we subtract these, we're going to get 5, and we're going to keep the sign of the larger. Well, 9 is larger than 4, and its original sign was positive. So this answer is positive 5. Let's finish with 2 more examples. Our first one is negative 11 plus 3. We have opposite signs here because the 11 is negative and the 3 is positive. So that means we're going to take the absolute value of each of these numbers and subtract, and then keep the sign of the larger. The absolute value of negative 11 is 11, and the absolute value of 3 is 3. So we're going to subtract these, 11 minus 3, and we're going to get 8. And then we're going to keep the sign of the larger one. Well, 11 is larger than 3, and 11's original sign was a negative. So this answer is going to be negative 8. The next problem is a negative 9 plus a negative 2. You'll notice in this case that they have the same signs. Both are negative. So in this case, we're going to take the absolute value and add them together, and then keep the sign of the larger. Well, the absolute value of negative 9 is 9, and the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. Since they had the same signs, both were negative, we're going to add them, and we get 11. And to complete it, we're going to keep the sign of the larger. 9 was larger than 2, so we're going to go back up to the original sign that 9 had, and it was negative. So this answer is negative 11.